This episode is brought to you in partnership by Clay Cooley Automotive, family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years. Clay, thank you for all you're doing to make intersections possible. Headquartered in Dallas, Texas, Arcus Golf is a premier owner and operator of nearly 90 private, resort, and daily fee courses in the U.S., including Cowboys Golf Club, the world's first and only NFL-themed golf club, and 8 other courses right here in the DFW Metroplex. Arcus is an innovative industry leader providing unrivaled lifestyle amenities that complement exceptional golf offerings. To learn more, visit arcusgolf.com, and thank you to the Arcus team for all that you do to make intersections happen.
Will Cain, another conversation where I'd say we went all over the map, but we probably went 3D on the thing. But it was fascinating. I really enjoyed him, and I thought he was honest, straightforward, and really related his experiences in a lot of different situations and gave us a view of where he sees the world.
From Sherman, Texas, talked about fantasy football on ESPN, and then ultimately is interviewing President Donald Trump on Fox. He's got a breadth that I think is unmatched by many. But it's his humility and it's his candor about what he believes and what he's seeking, which he calls truth, in all these conversations that really stuck out to me.
Well, I think the other thing, and it's something that we've talked about, and in some ways it's the reason that we're here, is the generational piece.
Absolutely.
Will is really kind of on the younger side of most of the media people. And it was interesting to get his perspective, especially related to the current administration, as well as some challenges that we've got in education, the media, and how we think about society.
Yeah, and then we look at the future, we look past kind of the Trump era, we look to what the future of politics and really what the world might look like over the next decade. It's a fascinating listen. Give it a listen. Tune in. Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, introduce our guest.
A name that a lot of people are going to recognize, and that's Will Cain. Will, fascinating, has gone from all aspects of media. He has been a political commentator. He's been a sports pundit. He has been on the media side of it, both from print, radio, and television, and now on social media with his own podcast. So we got a lot to cover.
We got a lot. It's going to be fun. Thanks so much for doing this.
Glad to be here.
What ties it all together? I kind of went through, we'll go in a little bit more detail, but what ties all of that through from being an entrepreneur, owning newspapers, going through to now being a commentator on politics, but having a sports show all your own?
If I had to search, and I do have to search, for a theme that ties it all together, I would sound very egotistical, and I would sound very much with my head in the clouds. And it would sound something like this, that it's this constant search and love of the truth. Now, that truth comes in a lot of forms. It can be serious and it can be fun. It can be light. It can be heavy. It can be on sports. It can be in news. It can be behind the scenes. It can be in front of the microphone. But I think from the earliest of age, I appreciated the power of media and information. And that meant sitting at the breakfast table, watching my mom watch the Today Show. That meant reading, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand and thinking about the power of Gail Winan. Yeah. And then ultimately, it meant me sharing what I think is the truth. So I would like to think, and no matter how self-congratulatory it might sound, that the thing that ties it together is a love and pursuit of the truth.
So pretty heady stuff, though.
Yeah.
The Will Cain Show is the title of the podcast, the program you had on ESPN, and on CNN. I'm not sure anybody else is going to be able to make that claim, by the way.
Well, it's either evidence of an overinflated ego or a lack of creativity in marketing.
Okay.
I love it.
Go back, though. Grew up in Sherman, Texas, not too far from Dallas.
Yes.
So talk a little bit more about that upbringing, how it kind of puts you in a position of clearly being interested in seeking the truth, but also kind of having an entrepreneurial spirit, too.
Well, I think one of the great blessings in my life is having been born and raised in Sherman, Texas. It will always be where I'm from. People say, "Where are you from?" And I always ask, do you mean where I live? And it is Dallas, Texas. But where I'm from is Sherman, Texas. And Sherman is a place that gave me a great sense of community, a deep sense of roots. And I think for me, served as a real springboard to whatever it is I wanted to do. It gave me a sense that I could, a real sense of nothing was outside of my grasp. Now, it's interesting that it gave me that feeling while also being very far removed from anything glamorous. You know, whenever my mom had the Today Show on, that was set, at Rockefeller Center in New York City, and that was very far away. And at my age, I'm Gen X, everything that was at the center of pop culture was centered in Southern California. Mm-hmm. So, living on the outskirts of Sherman on 7 acres felt very removed from that, but it never felt unreachable. And that's in part because of the community that I was raised in Sherman, in part because I had a father that gave me a world of unearned confidence. He always filled me with big ideas and the sense that I could achieve whatever it is I set my mind to achieve.
What did he do?
My father was an attorney in Sherman, Texas. He had the office on the town square right next to the courthouse.
Oh, that's great.
And was your mother at home?
My mother was at home. And I told you about the influence that my mother had in watching the Today Show every morning. The other big influence was obviously my father. In the courtroom, in the office, I would go after school, sit across from his desk, listen to him talk to clients on the phone. And from that early age, I loved the idea of argumentation and persuasion as a path to finding the truth.
So you talk about the cultural changes of Sherman to Southern California, but you actually pursued it. I'm not sure a lot of people have gone to Pepperdine from Sherman.
Well, everything that I think felt scary and far away meant that I had to try, that I wanted to go see if I could do. Now, I mentioned that California had this outsized place, and I think all of our consciousness back in the 80s and 90s. And I think, by the way, it has burned all of that asset. And you now see California kids flooding to our home.
Bingo.
They're going to SMU. They're going to TCU. They're getting jobs in Dallas.
Along with their parents and their companies.
That's right. Their parents and their companies follow often and make this their permanent home, and good. Mostly good. Coming to Texas. But back then, that's where everything was happening, Tom. I mean, it was the music. It was the movies. And I grew up spending some of my summers in Hawaii every year of my life since the age of 3. And almost everybody that was there in the summers with me was from California. So I had this romanticized vision
where about in Hawaii?
Of California. Maui. Not far outside of Lahaina in West Maui, which is now, Lahaina is largely missing. It's largely burned down. And it's been one of the great, most fulfilling parts of my career was that because of this platform, because of the grace of Fox News, I was able to dive into that story, cover it, and really also not just cover a story, but try to do something good with the story. We raised $2.6 million through the generosity of Fox News viewers, and along with 2 other families who also spent their summers in Maui, gave away $12,000 grants to 200-something different families that lost their home in Lahaina.
A little bit of a tangent, but do you think Lahaina will ever be built back? I mean, it's given that historic architecture, those historic buildings, not a whole lot of density attached to it. Do you think they can ever recreate that economically?
I think that's a really difficult prospect for not just Lahaina, but for Pacific Palisades, California. Anybody that suffers fire is just so absolutely devastating. In California, they have a whole host of different issues that are tied to their politics, not some of which are present in Hawaii. But you point out the historic buildings. Lahaina will come back. I do not know that Lahaina will look like the one that we grew up with. If you're familiar at all with Maui or Lahaina, one of the most famous, iconic areas of it is Front Street. It was shops and restaurants right along the ocean. And because of environmental issues, because of arguments within the community about what it should look like, I doubt we'll ever get that part back of Lahaina.
I dealt with land use in Hawaii for a long time. So anyway, let's go back. So then from Pepperdine back to UT, law degree, but you never really practiced law. You kind of took that entrepreneurial and started buying newspapers. So talk about why UT Law and then kind of the absence of the traditional, I'm going to go into a law firm.
Well, there's one gap in there. There's two steps that you missed in that process, and I'll just mention them because of their relevance of bringing me ultimately to media. So I did go to law school and at UT, And after law school, I thought I'd be incredibly happy being a lawyer. But being the son not just of an attorney, but a plaintiff's attorney, really in the beginning raised me to think of how far is the fence. I need to know how hard to hit the ball. What is the home run? And my dad used to have he had an Old West 6-shooter on his wall framed with like 6 bullets underneath the gun. And it said gunfighters didn't charge by the bullet. In his mind, that was a shot at big firm lawyers in Dallas, largely, that charged by the hour. And he was a plaintiff's attorney that sought contingency fee, get it done by the job. But that was a mentality that I grew up with, like, what is the home run? And when I was graduating law school, going to be a lawyer felt like a double. It felt like a nice life. I had envisioned it. I probably would have gone and been a county prosecutor, a DA in somewhere in Texas, and ultimately ended up a criminal defense attorney because at some point you have to make some money. And that's probably a path that I would have pursued. And it would have been a great life. But I thought, I want to go for the home run. And at that time, the home run to me meant the beginning of my ideas of media. It was write the great American novel. So I moved to Montana. And the reason that I moved to Montana was twofold. Lonesome Dove, and at least Gen X male thinks that is really, the great American novel. Yeah. And we got to be Robert Duvall. We got to be Augustus McCrae. We got to be Woodrow Call or Tommy Lee Jones. And Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. And John Steinbeck wrote this book purportedly where he rode around America in an RV with his dog Charlie. And he went state by state and wanted to get a real sense of America. And he gets to Montana and he says, if you took a 10-year-old boy from Washington, D.C. to describe Texas, what he would in reality describe would be Montana. So between those two pieces of work, I thought, well, damn, I got to go to Montana. And I did. And I loaded up my dog, Leon, and my truck, and I drove north. And I lived in Montana to write the great American novel, did write a novel, didn't go anywhere. And at the end of that year, I was there for 1 year. Wonderful experience. Worked on a ranch.
Yeah, you're a ranch hand. Your son
outfitter.
gave me a little bit of insider knowledge here.
Yes. And spent my nights when I wasn't working on the ranch typing away on a laptop. But at the end of that year, my father passed away. He died very young, 55, and I came home. And I wound up his practice. He had a law partner who's a good friend, and we worked together for about a year. I finished editing my novel. I worked a little bit in law, but just committed myself to pursuing something that I envisioned as a home run.
So I want to know about the novel.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the novel.
And the novel is really, of all the questions that I'm asked, probably provides me with the opportunity for the greatest embarrassment. Like, what do you write at the age of 25? What is your great American novel? And all you do is you write about something that you might know, And so I think it was a little bit like a book about a quarter-life crisis, a coming-of-age tale. People figuring out, young men, set in Texas, what they want to do with their life. And, I put it at the time, like, through this prism, this format of them playing a game that ultimately put each of their friendships to the test and their lives to the test on what they would end up being in life. The long and short of it is, Tom, that's the most you're going to get out of me about this novel. And it sits on people often ask me, I'm like, unless you can climb to the top of my closet, hidden, and swipe off all the dust, you will never see that attempt at a novel.
Grisham and Balducci had to wait a while too, so maybe we'll see it at some point.
Now I'm a Fox News host, which basically means you are a guaranteed bestseller. So I will write another book, and this one will be at the top of the charts.
So I want to stop you for a second. Sherman, Texas, I think water polo at Pepperdine.
True.
UT, Montana ranch hand. What were you searching for?
That's a great question.
What was going on?
That's a great question. I don't know, Kyle, but I need to remember to be forgiving of my children when they do the same thing and they want to search for themselves. Sure. My friends all used to joke about, all these contradictions, whatever, Hawaii and Montana. They would make fun of me in a loving way. And they still do. My friends still do, which I love. I don't know the answer to that question. I was searching for adventure. I was searching for fulfillment. I was searching for purpose and searching for what I envisioned as a life that would amount to the home run. I do want to say, because I've mentioned that term several times, like searching for the home run. You mentioned also I'm a sports fan, always have been from birth, and I did that professionally as well. And that was a great experience, 5 years at ESPN. And one of the things that when you really think about sports, like when you really think about it on a day-to-day basis and you analyze success and you talk to the greats, that it gave me another way to think about accomplishment and success. And I learned to appreciate the idea that the way to success for the vast majority of people isn't to hit the home run. It is to appreciate the concept of grinding out singles. You can be a Hall of Famer like Tony Gwynn or Kirby Puckett and never get there on the back of the home run. And life is full of racking up singles. This is the story, I think, of at one time, America's richest man, still one of the top 5 in Warren Buffett. It's less about the big windfall and more about compound interest. It's about not home runs, but singles.
Yeah.
And then you went in, though, and bought newspapers and got in the newspaper business.
So when I was in Montana, Tom, I also had the opportunity not just to write, but to read. And I read a lot. And I mentioned it in passing, but at one time, still am in a lot of ways, was a big fan of Ayn Rand and read everything that she wrote. And, in The Fountainhead, she writes about Gail Wyman, who owned newspapers. He was a media empire entrepreneur. And I read a book by a man named Al Newharth, who at the time was the CEO of Gannett. Gannett was a massive newspaper company in America, and they started something incredibly innovative in, I believe, the early 90s. It could have been the late 80s, and that innovation was USA Today. Yeah. And it's quaint to look back on it in 2025 to think about its innovation, but the idea to build a national newspaper, how do you print that overnight? How do you get it to everywhere it needs to be? And I remember reading the biography of Newharth, and he says this thing. He says, I wish for all my children to have one great failure before the age of 30. Because if you haven't failed, then you haven't pushed it hard enough. You haven't risked. And if you do fail and you do so before the age of 30, you have the best chance of rebounding. It's harder once you have kids, once you have a lot of responsibility. So between reading those things, I thought, I do want to go into media. I don't just want to give up the written word. I didn't come from the kind of money or background to buy television license or even radio license to buy a station, but I could figure out how to buy small town newspapers. And so first I had to figure out, how do you run a small town newspaper? How do you do this? And I had spent some time in Sherman after my dad died. I'm the oldest of 4. My youngest brother was in high school. I'm studying. I'm winding up my dad's law practice. And I'm figuring out what I want to do entrepreneurially. And I take a job ultimately in Llano and worked in Johnson City and Blanco and worked at community weekly newspapers and learned the business for $19,000 a year. Wow. All my buddies that went to UT Law were making much more than $19,000.
What year was this?
This would have been in about 2002 or so.
Okay. So we jump into quinceañeras at some point.
Well, the first thing that I did after I learned that, is I went and did newspapers.
Sure.
And I had decided at that point I was going to be a media entrepreneur. And people were already proclaiming the death of print media. And here I am now launching into print media. So I said, okay, there's 3 niches that I'm going to be involved in that are growing regardless of circulation. There's insulation by their very nature of growth. And those had 3 niches that I was interested in. One was alternative weekly free newspapers like the Dallas Observer. Luckily, I didn't go down that path. My politics would not have fit well, for example, with the Village Voice. But the second 2 niches were community newspapers in growth path areas. So I targeted, and my community newspapers that I bought after I left the Hill Country were the Van Alstyne Leader, the Animalista Tribune. I started a newspaper in Prosper, the Prosper Press. So I knew these communities would boom. I knew they were going to grow. And even if circulation was declining at a macro scale, for me, on a micro scale, I would have a growing audience. That worked for me. I sold that newspaper business some 3 years later to Stevens Media, which owned the Sherman Democrat and the Denison Herald, which became the Herald Democrat for those two towns. And they owned the Las Vegas Review-Journal and some other big newspapers. Then the third and final niche I was interested in was the Latino media, because it was, again, a growing population. And regardless of what was happening to quote-unquote circulation, I would have a growing population. Sure. And so, yes, that ultimately led me to quinceañeras.
But now we get into the ESPN and CNN, et cetera. But where you really made your name in those venues was as a conservative voice, very much a conservative voice at ESPN, clearly at CNN, then of course at Fox. Where did the conservative philosophy, principles, where did that come in? Education, your dad?
No, because my dad, as I mentioned, was a plaintiff's attorney, which meant that he was terrified of tort reform.
Absolutely.
And he was a lifelong Democrat. That means something very different today than what it means to be a Democrat. To be a Texas Democrat in the 1980s and 1990s is not what it is today to be a Democrat. And there was nothing cultural about my dad on the left. It was pure self-interest and being a trial attorney that led him to voting Democrat. But still, when you're a little kid, it's team sport. It's team politics. I was like, well, I come from Democrats. I wasn't raised as a quote-unquote Republican. Law school, Tom, is really my first
Not
major
usually
movement.
a place somebody moves to the right of the political spectrum.
Well, that's an indictment of the legal professors and legal education system in America, because everything else should be leaning you, in my opinion, my very strong opinion, toward the right.
Sure.
I mean, once you invest in understanding the founding of America, once you invest in its foundational documents, once you understand the Constitution, I don't know how you end up seeing it through the lens of judicial activism or leftist politics. This amazing experiment, this singular and great experiment on the face of humanity, is predicated on those documents in that moment of time. And once you start learning that, I do think it inevitably gravitates you towards the right.
Was there a class or a professor that sparked this?
Oh, that will only get me even more controversial. Yes, I'll tell you the most brilliant professor I had. He's long passed, but he's one of the most controversial professors at Texas Law, and his name was Lino Graglia. And Lino Graglia was famous because he opposed affirmative action. I was the first class at the University of Texas to enter law school after we had done away in Texas with affirmative action. Jesse Jackson came to protest. Jesse Jackson protested Lino Graglia. Lino Graglia was brilliant. To sit in his class and to listen to him talk about the United States Constitution and legal precedent and the overinflated egos of justices and judges it was an incredible education in this, and I think, true justice in America.
So how has the educational system, higher education, estimated 90 to 95% of the professors are left, maybe a high proportion are far left, progressive, et cetera. We see all the issues that have come out of especially the schools in the Northeast. We see degrees now that have really little economic value attached to them. What's happened to our higher education system, and how did we get there?
At least two main ingredients. I'll make it three. One, self-selection mechanism. And we always have to appreciate when we ask ourselves why certain industries are the way they are, certainly ideologically, the power of self-selection. Why is everybody in oil and gas, on the whole and on the average, on the right? Well, there's a self-selection mechanism of people that choose to go into oil and gas. Why is everybody in the media on the left? Because there's a huge self-selection mechanism. It's starting at the high school level. Who are the kids that gravitate towards journalism? The kids who are already predispositioned for whatever reason to go towards journalism. And I think the same thing applies to not just higher education. So whether or not we're talking about kindergarten teachers, high school teachers, or college professors, there's a self-selection mechanism. That brings second, indoctrination. There is no doubt that teacher colleges, where these people go to learn to be teachers, already teach many of these ideas that are grounded in, if you take it back, and a lot of people who disagree with me, and I don't doubt that you have many people listening to your show who might not share my politics, and I appreciate that. But when you use the word Marxism, their ears often turn off because it sounds cliched. But it's a real thing, a real ideological background with a real history in America. And it has been integrated largely through the early 20th century progressive movement into our education system. So these kids who may or may not be predisposed to having these ideas then go into the colleges where it's baked in. Social justice, before we even knew it was called social justice. Critical theory, dating back to the 60s. The progressive movement dating back to the 20s is all part of the teacher college system. And then the third and final component is cowardice, just pure cowardice. It is a more modern version where the tail wags the dog. They're afraid of their students. And you see that at those Northeastern colleges. You see it everywhere. Yeah. But the worst thing in the world is to be called a racist.
So
to be called a sexist, to be called any of the ad hominem attacks that students would lob against their professors. Therefore, the professors bend to the irrational emotions of the students.
So you use the term Marxism, and socialism was a term that politicians ran away from hard, even though they might have leaned towards that from a philosophical or principle standpoint. But we've just seen in New York somebody not only run towards it, but embrace it and try to redefine it. We look at polls today that have young people far and away saying they favor socialism vis-a-vis capitalism with all of the benefits that you started to allude to, and we can get in later. So where have we gone off track on that, and what does that mean for where we go as a nation?
So there's a lot of me. There's a lot of me that sits here and wants to feel outrage or mockery. They're the two of the most obvious emotions that people experience. They probably experience them a lot when they watch cable news. Outrage and mockery. I want to mock those kids. I want to mock Zohran Mamdani. I want to be outraged these kids have embraced this. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to revert to outrage or mockery. Instead, I seek to understand because the understanding arrives at the truth. And here's what I think. I believe it is built upon, in part, some of the things that have animated the movements of the right. And so, first, let's talk about the power of populism. Populism is on the rise. The idea that the masses might have a better idea of what's going on in their own lives than the elites that tell them, hang in there, this is good over the long haul. And I've been guilty of that in my life. And I still appreciate the idea of principle. I love William F. Buckley. I like National Review. I have real philosophical grounding, going much further than the names I just checked, but you can go back again to the founders or to, Locke. You can go back to much deeper philosophers going back to the UK that give you a real reason to believe in conservative values. But you can't just keep going back to those heady ideas. You have to hear the people. You have to hear the people. Populism is a fire that can heat you or it can burn out of control. And so my point is the people are telling us that a lot about our system isn't working for them, and they're not wrong. I think we have veered away from pure capitalism. In a lot of ways, we've veered towards corporatism. We have developed codes and laws that favor the powerful, that aren't truly built on simply merit. And so when the kids complain, we need to hear those complaints. When they look at wage stagnation, we need to hear that complaint. When they hear about wage stagnation in the face of inflation, specifically in some big categories like housing, we need to hear that complaint. So I understand the background of what they may be feeling, especially in a place like New York City. Now, you describe the problem and you say you got to listen to populism. Socialism is the easiest answer. It's the easiest answer. I'll give you more.
Society's always going back to that.
It's just easy. And Republicans have a problem like that right now when it comes to healthcare. Democrats will extend Obamacare subsidies. What will you do? Well, we'll bring market mechanisms in to bring prices down. Good luck. Sell that. The other guy's selling free.
Yeah.
Well, but on this topic, if you look at it's kind of interesting. If you look at Trump's win a year ago, if you look at Mamdani's win, you can make the argument that they won for the same reasons. Trump won largely because you had a disenfranchised populace in that Alabama area between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia into Ohio, Wisconsin, that sort of thing. People who felt that they had been left out of the economy. As you said, elites were running it. They were completely the loser. That propelled Trump to a victory, taking all of those swing states when we go back to 2024. Mamdani, different people, young as opposed to older. New York, clearly not the same as being in rural Pennsylvania or Ohio, but still people who felt 24 years old, I can't afford anything, the economy's left me behind, I'm disenfranchised. In either case, I am going to look for anybody that can give me a solution, regardless if it's well thought out.
Yes.
Comment?
No, you're right. I agree. And I think that explains in some part the rise of Zohran Mamdani. I don't think you can also ignore, beyond the transactional nature of affordability politics, the power of cultural politics. And that's very, very important and powerful. And so when you describe Trump's victory, I don't think it can be divorced from the cultural movement that is Trumpism. Trumpism is a lot of things, including the inclusion of populism into conservative politics. But it cannot be understated how much the cultural movement of Trumpism meant. And that cultural movement on his behalf is a love of America. It's an elevation of patriotism. It's an understanding of this project. For the opposite, Mamdani's and his running buddies, ideological fellow travelers, the AOCs and the Ilhan Omar's is a hatred of America. It is, and I do believe this. I don't think I'm being unfair or ungenerous in a description of the way they think and see and feel and talk about America. And so therefore, one's vision is an exaltation and a movement forward of America, and the other is a destruction and a rebuild in some other image of America.
Now, but you've, again, been recognized, I think fairly so, as a voice for the conservative movement. We look at Trump, though, and although he might be labeled a conservative, you start looking at a lot of his policies. The trade policies, not traditional conservative policies. In a lot of ways, the foreign policy, not traditional conservative. We talked about the elites issue, corporate America, et cetera. Those seem to be moving that way and away from the conservatism of the entrepreneurial small business, those sorts of things. How much of Trump is conservative? And as a conservative, how do you look at the policies being implemented? And again, significant change over the last 10 months.
Well, let's start with how you described me. You described me the other way other people have described me. And I would have, to be fair, described myself as well as conservative. But I as well have been through a process of evolution and change and reimagining or reexamining my own ideas, largely because of, and I give him a lot of credit on this, because of President Donald Trump. I will tell you this, and when you say this, so for so many listening, even those who might share my view of the world think it sounds like picking up your pom-poms. I think it's just accurate, cold diagnosis that we're living in the most influential and significant president in the last century, not just our lifetimes, in the last century. And I think I'm being safe by saying century. I mean, I could go back further perhaps, but his redefinition, not just of conservatism, but every single person's relationship with politics in America has been incredibly influenced. Not all of it positive. Some people have just reverted to complete hatred and personality politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
But my point in laying all that out to you, Tom, is that when I was at ESPN, the Washington Post wrote an article like, ESPN needs a voice like mine. And it couched everything that I stood for and who I am as conservative. You know, what I would say animates or ties together my beliefs is American. Easy to say, everybody wants to, drape themselves in the flag. But what I'm telling you is, when I look at something, I'm somewhere between the transactional nature of Donald Trump and the previous principled, ideologically conservative version of myself that predated Donald Trump. And I try to analyze everything through a much simpler mechanism and much simpler prism. Is this good for America?
So let's look at the other side. Where did the Democratic Party start its movement? Because I look at Al Gore in 2000, obviously he lost, and then you have 8 years of Bush, but then Obama comes in and he's the promise maker. Now, I don't know if he's the promise keeper, but he's the promise maker around change. And I would say the last 15 years, plus the GFC, which really then began to separate the economic ties in America between the haves with the assets, et cetera, and the have-nots. Where did the left start to begin this drift that has not just been a slow drift, but it's been an absolute runaway from their party platform in 2004, 2008? Well, how did we get here?
One could argue, Kyle, and you didn't describe it inaccurately, that it has been a continuation. It's the very nature of progressive politics as it was originally envisioned, dating back to the 1920s under Woodrow Wilson. It is the ever-expansive presence of government in your life. The more, the better. The more of everything, the better. The more entitlement, the more regulation, the more micromanagement, the better.
The solution.
The solution. And it's grounded in a lack of humility. It's grounded in that elitism. It's at the very core of the ideology that I know better than you how to manage your life. And that was going to be a cancer that malignantly grew over time. That doesn't mean the rate didn't change, to your point. And the rate does change. And it has changed drastically in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be a downplay of the individual versus the collective.
That is absolutely true.
Right. Yeah.
It is, and in my mind, it's a denial of the dignity of the individual, that you belong to something. And by the way, everything has to be understood as not wholly true and not wholly false. Everything is grounded in a kernel of things. We are part of something bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my path as well, you asked me about Sherman. Sherman played a big role in my life, but it didn't come back around into my consciousness until later. Like, I went through a real phase, as I invoked Ayn Rand, of believing in the radical individualism, the master of his own universe. And it's later in life that I understand not just the reality, but the virtue of being part of something more than me.
Right.
My community, my faith, of course, my family.
Mm-hmm.
You are part, my history, my family's history, their path through this country. These are all important parts because you want to think of yourself as a free radical.
Mm-hmm.
And you are. You have free will. You have the destiny to make your own choices. But it's a little bit egotistical to think you aren't part of what came before you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not part of something greater after you're here. And you're not part of something while you're here. And so that, you know, that idea of the individual as part of the community is not wholly wrong, but is the individual subverted through force to the community. And that's the progressive vision. I just want to address your movement for them really quickly, Kyle.
For sure.
For me, Barack Obama was a big divide. That's what brought me into politics. That's what left me, that's what guided me away from community newspapers,
Mm-hmm.
away from quinceañeras. It's what brought me back into what I thought was more important and what I was more passionate about. Because
Elaborate more on that.
I saw
Why?
Barack Obama as a big divide, something different than what came before him. It wasn't quite obvious in 2008 that it would be the beginning of the acceleration of identity politics. I truly do not think it was. I didn't think he originally leaned into his own identity politics.
Yeah,
he did over the course of his 8 years, but he didn't when he was elected in 2008. Rather, it was the socialism angle. I saw him as somebody who saw our relationship with government different than I saw our relationship with government. So it was much more ideological. But over his 8 years, he began the process of bringing identity politics to the fore of the American conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that burned out of control. And even further than he probably ever envisioned it. And from Ferguson to Trayvon Martin to Me Too to ultimately George Floyd with a sprinkle of Colin Kaepernick, over a decade period, it burned out of control to the Democrat Party of the last 5 years is unrecognizable to the Democrat Party simply 5 years prior.
Yeah.
So if you had taken a snapshot of the Democrat Party in 2010, it would be unrecognizable of the Democrat Party in 2021.
Which is fascinating because when he came on to the stage, that was 2004, in a speech that really talked about the individual and the fact that only in America could an individual rise up and achieve their dreams.
Like him.
Yeah, and at this point, I don't really know what is his core center. I don't know. I've met a lot of celebrities. I've met a lot of politicians. I have not met Barack Obama, and I don't know what animates Barack Obama. I think he has a great ego, but that doesn't make him unique. Every politician does. We just met, Tom. But every politician does, generally. There's some reason. We'd like to think it's all service. And one day maybe I will as well. I have an ego. But I don't know. I
think there's a message.
I don't know what guides Barack Obama.
So let's step back a little bit further then and talk about where the country is right now. I think a lot of people look at it and say, well, we're not getting much right anymore. We've talked about some of the folks that were really, when I grew up, kind of, my mom didn't have a whole lot, but I would argue that she was the one that made America. Went out, worked hard, that sort of thing. Those folks, arguably, there's not a middle class now, but even the middle class that we do have, wages fundamentally flat for the last 40 years, affordability of homes, educations, those sorts of things, going further and further away from the masses of the people. We look at our competitive position. I think it's difficult to make the argument that we're in a better position than we were, pick your number, 10 or 20 years ago. You look at a China where, 20, 30 years ago, 10% of the students went to college. Now they're at 61%. It's nearly all STEM as opposed to the conversation we had before. Are we are we at a point where we don't believe we can do anything? You look at government today and it's stuck. We can't even address major issues, much less solve them.
I don't wholeheartedly or 100% endorse your diagnosis. I think you point to some very real issues over a broader timeline. I see this is going to be a complicated answer, and I don't.
It's not an easy question.
It's not an easy question. It's going to be a complicated answer that is not meant to dodge the very direct thing that you have asked me. But so let me see if I can work through some complicated thoughts. Your diagnosis over a 40 to 50 year timeline is accurate. Over a shorter timeline, I would say of really the last 10 to 11 months, but what I see is a movement that starts before that, and I'm not just talking about Donald Trump. What I see is a cultural movement among young people. Kyle knows I have teenage boys. I'd like to think that gives me some exposure to where we might be headed in the future. And I see a lot of beautiful green shoots. I see a lot. Everyone knows the negatives. Everyone knows the rising rates of...
But movement to that right, counter to what we talked about a moment ago.
Let's even set aside the concept of left-right for a moment. Okay. We all know the rates of depression, of suicide, of aimlessness, of purposelessness, of young men, specifically young men, that have been told they have no place in the future of America. But I'm beginning to see green shoots among these young men. And the green shoots are something deeper. Let me set that aside for a moment. I'm going to return. Because here's the scariest part. I think it's going to get worse from what you described over the last 40 to 50 years. I'm terrified, and I'm trying not to be a troglodyte, drag my knuckles around, but I'm terrified of what AI is going to do to the job market. I'm terrified of what a population looks like with 50% unemployment. I'm terrified of a population where not only do they have no purpose, but they may have even put the concept of family creation on the back burner. I know, for example, that porn is one of the biggest industries on the internet. I also know that people are starting to begin relationships with their AI chatbot. I also know that robots are on the way. I see the merger of those three things, relationships with chatbots, humanoid robots, porn. I don't see a far too distant future where people are neglecting the concept of family creation. Why? I have this thing. I have this thing that I own. That is my robot, that is my pal, that is my confidant, that is my person I have a relationship with physically and emotionally. And I think, what does the future look like, not only when you don't have a job, but you don't have a family? And I'm very concerned, Tom, not just about the things you talked about, but even more profound things. Back to the green shoots. I will pick that back up.
I thought I went to a tough point.
We really went to a tough point.
Back to the green shoots. I see a resurgence in religion. I see a resurgence in faith. And in a world of chaos where I don't even pretend to have the answers, I don't pretend to have the answers. And I actually think the best you can do is elect presidents, not unlike Donald Trump, who see things transactionally through the prism of what serves America first in a rapidly changing environment, and a populace that has a higher purpose. We have to remember we have a higher purpose. And I'm seeing that. I live in Texas. I live in Dallas.
Sure.
I don't want any longer live in New York. I might have a bleaker outlook if I lived in New York. But here, in Texas, in Dallas, I think we've got a good generation coming. I hope.
For years, you spent time in New York. I mean, you saw
15
this.
years.
You lived it.
15 years.
So I want to touch on one thing you mentioned actually previously. You talked about your faith. Where did that sprout for you?
Yeah.
Because it's been mentioned a few times, but it hasn't been addressed, I'd say, as like a benchmark yet. Where did that sprout for you? And what do you think it means as you view the world through a faith lens?
Well, so this is sometimes an uncomfortable conversation for me because I don't feel like I have any position or pulpit worthy of preaching. Look, I grew up in church every Sunday. First United Methodist Church in Sherman, Texas. I went to youth group every Sunday night. It was, if I'm being quite honest, yes, internalized and deep and somewhat mechanical. Then I grow up and I go to law school and I read Ayn Rand and I start thinking, no, you know what? I'm agnostic because I'm intellectual and I want to be smart and I want to think my way through things. And I spent a lot of years in that wilderness. And luckily, but not enjoyably, life has a way of giving you back humility. And it's good because you're not the smartest guy that ever walked around. And I'll give you a couple. You know my oldest son. I don't think I'm sharing anything he wouldn't want me to share. When he was 3 years old, living in New York City, he pulled a crock pot off the counter. And it was filled of his mother making tomato sauce with meatballs in it. So it had meat grease in a crock pot, hot as sin. My nephew was visiting from Odessa. He pulled it onto himself, and he had third-degree burns over 7% of his body. He luckily missed his face. But we spent 3 weeks, a little over, in a hospital in New York City, trading nights, my wife and I. She was pregnant with my second son. And when we would trade those nights, I remember this. I would walk across Central Park. It was the hospital's on the Upper East Side. I lived on the Upper West Side. And I would walk home. I was like, I'm not getting in a cab. I just need to walk. Because when you're in the hospital for a burn unit, it's rough. Okay, it's gotten better. And this isn't a woe is me story. This is something else. It's rough. Okay, the treatment in the old days was abrasion. So you get a third-degree burn, it's white. You know, that means the skin is cooked. And in order to find out if they can bring it back, they have to go through like this abrasion treatment where they basically take, it's gotten better, metal sponges. So they load you up on opioids to numb you out. Then they take these metal sponges and they rub raw skin and hope they can get to red or pink because you got to get the white off. And you're in there with your 3-year-old pinning him down while they're doing this. There's not enough, opium or opioids in the world to make him not feel it. And you're just raw, dude, at the end of 20. And this is what I'm going through. Imagine what he's going through, right? And I would buy a pack of cigarettes and I would walk across Central Park and smoke as many as I can as I went home by myself as my wife took my place in the hospital. And I remember thinking this, man, people go through way worse than me. This is awful, but people go through way worse. And you're telling me you don't need God? Like some intellectual answer to all of this? And you don't need God? And that began the process of humility that over time, that was you've met Charlie. He's now 17, beautiful kid, doing great. Of moving me in that direction, Kyle, of beginning to rediscover my own humility, that I'm not the master of my own universe, that there is a greater plan. And also understanding that success, I don't know if I'm a success. I really don't know. I don't think I am because I know that I have a lot more that I want to do. But I remember talking to my buddies who were undeniably successes before me. Well, most of them lived here. They weren't up in New York with me. And they would hit a lick, or they made this amount of money. And they all would tell me how underwhelming it feels. It feels so underwhelming to be successful on the trappings of earth. And in the mix of all that, you just mix all the and you realize, A, have some humility, B, seek fulfillment in a higher purpose.
Fascinating.
One of the challenges that we've got as a nation, and you see it, and you've seen it from a lot of different angles, is the element of trust. As a collective society, we're losing trust. You see any type of poll, trust in Congress, Washington, single digit.
Forget them. How about what I do?
Trust in media. Trust in the media. Trust in education now. All of those sorts of things. With the trust so low, where do we go? Because the premise is people listen to you because they trust you. I go to a restaurant because I trust them to serve good food. Everything's built on trust, but yet it seems like that's what's crumbling in our society.
I think it's already crumbled. And now what do you do? Look, let's be self-reflective. There is a trust crisis on the right. Today, literally today. Who knows when you will publish this, but it will still be ongoing whenever you publish this. There is a trust crisis on the right, okay? You might have to be hyper online. You might not. To understand, I'm referencing not just one story, but multiple stories, a trust crisis on the right. And this is something that came before on the left. And it was destroyed. The reason for all of this is because people who were granted trust through institutional power for a long time incinerated that trust.
Absolutely.
People that do what I do for a living, people at places of my previous employment.
Yep.
I have a lot of harsh words for specifically CNN. And people at the CDC, people at the NHS, people at the presidency's office, at the White House, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, at every level lied to Americans, and they know it. I'll go to a party. I went to a party this week here in Dallas, and people are asking me about some of these trust issues on the right. And one of the things they'll say to me is, yeah, but we've been lied to so much about so many things. And I'll tell them, you're absolutely right. But you can't, just because you shouldn't believe everything doesn't mean you should disbelieve everything. And my only answer, Tom, is authenticity. That's it. That's all I have. Mine isn't always getting it right. I make no promise to my audience that I will always get it right. My only promise to my audience is I will be 100% real And in that process, I'll pursue the truth. And together at times, I hope, more often than not, and I hope, let's put the over-under at 80%. I hope I get it right. But I hope you trust me because I'm trying to get it right. I'm being real to find the truth.
So at ESPN, one of the criticisms, but I think one of the reasons you're there too, was you talked about culture, you talked about politics, and in a lot of ways came after some of the race issues, the identity politics, those sorts of things, and dealt with them. What was that environment like, both in a sports environment, but one that, again, probably wasn't conducive to a lot of those views?
It's wonderful. I had a wonderful 5 years at ESPN. I loved it. George Will once said about the founding of Fox News that Roger Ailes discovered a wonderful niche. Half. I got to ESPN with no mission to be the conservative voice of sports. Simply to talk about sports, which, by the way, was radical in and of itself. Like, when I got the Will Cain Show, which was a radio show on ESPN Radio in 2018, my mission with my fellas, my guys, my producers was, we're talking sports. Like, we're doing Dak Prescott versus Carson Wentz. And guess what? The audience is going to eat it up. And the ratings went through the roof because my predecessor didn't do that. And a lot of ESPN didn't do that. So a lot of people describe me as like the conservative,
because they got off of the sports
voice.
issue.
Yeah. Oh, willingly.
Oh, yeah.
And eagerly. I did not. I told everybody Dak Prescott was better than Carson Wentz, and I was right on that one. I won that one going away. I was right about Luka Doncic. And that was against Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman, and they all argued for DeAndre Ayton and Marvin Bagley. I said, no, Luka Doncic. I was right about Luka Doncic. But I enjoyed it, man. Here's something, and I'm not trying to everything overly intellectualize, but I think by our very nature, we're tribal. We just are. It's a condition of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's because it's a survival tool, right? It's not necessarily bad, but it can be bad. It's obviously bad when it manifests in things like racial tribalism. But sports is a cathartic tribalism, and it always has been, and I love it. I am a Cowboys, Rangers, Mavericks, Longhorns fan, and I'm an apologist, and I'm a homer, and I'm all the bad things you want to call me. That's right. That's who I am. And I love it because this is my irrational, cathartic tribe that I was born into. But I did go into those issues, Tom, when it became unavoidable and when culture crossed over into sports, I would do it. And I'm proud of the way we did at ESPN. I always heard from divergent voices. If you thought Colin Kaepernick was a social justice hero, I heard from you, both as a caller and as a guest that was invited on. And I'm proud of what we did at ESPN. And I had a lot of fun. And despite what people say, everybody liked me. We were friends. Everybody says everybody hated me. Well, they lied to me or they lie now. Either way, trust me, I know what a locker room is like. So we were friends.
But then sports, successful. But then you jump over to CNN, and now you're right in the middle of politics.
Well, CNN came before ESPN.
Yeah.
So I started CNN in 2010, was there almost to 2015, ESPN 2015 to 2020.
Yeah. And then what I should say is there to Fox.
Fox, that's right.
Which then became
in
the
2020,
hard politics,
I came back
the
to
hard
Fox.
politics, yeah.
And that was a moment, that was during COVID. It was literally during COVID. My contract with ESPN was up in March or April of 2020. Like the world is shutting down, and we're negotiating a contract. And I'd been approached a few months prior about an opportunity at Fox News, and I'm like, I'm really happy at ESPN. I was really happy. But as the world continued to unravel, first with COVID, then with George Floyd, and race, I saw that there was much deeper stuff going on, important stuff that I wanted to address head on. Not just when, there's some fake story about a noose in Bubba Wallace's garage at a NASCAR race, but I want to do a real story and talk about this stuff overtly because I think it's that important. And I accepted the invitation at that point to join Fox.
So why did Fox do it? Why did Fox go out into sports and say, hey, this is a guy that can make a difference for us?
That's not something they often do. They don't hire from the outside often. They certainly don't hire from outside the world of news and politics. Well, I'd done it before, so I'd like to think I had that credibility.
From the CNN.
From my CNN days. They saw me on First Take. They knew I could debate, which is a different type of thing to do. Debating Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman on a daily basis. I think they liked that. They knew my values. They were on display. And I can't take credit away from one of my very good friends, who is now the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Yeah. We were friends dating to our days before I had left for ESPN, even before he had joined Fox. And he was one of the hosts of Fox and Friends Weekend. And he said to some very smart and insightful people at Fox, you guys should take a look at him. He's great. And so thank you, Pete.
So
That's awesome.
let's talk about Pete.
Sure.
He's been Department of Defense, Department of War, 10 months now. So how do you rate his performance?
Hey, Pete's doing a great job.
A+++. Like
I mean,
Trump would
I
say.
will readily admit that I'm a biased.
That's fine.
Analyst on this. I would like to think I'm more objective than perhaps I am when I think about the Cowboys. Look, I know Pete. I know the guy, and I think the world of Pete. And I think that, he hasn't been without, a misstep or two, most of which have been overstated, I believe, in the media. I mean, most notably Signalgate.
Yes.
That's not to say that he did everything right in Signalgate, but not the hyperventilating, hair on fire reporting that has been done about Signalgate. And you just have to understand the evolution of media, and I've been inside these institutions. And what you're looking at with most of these institutions is far beyond even agenda-driven. It is propaganda and purpose-driven. And the purpose for the last decade of media has been to take down Donald Trump. And the thing you want to do with what has turned out to be a fairly bulletproof man in Donald Trump is then go after his surrogates. And there's no better surrogate to go after than a Fox News host who's now the Secretary of War.
Yeah. So,
well, on Pete, a lot of what he's done has gone in over the last 10 months. It's kind of flipped things up. And I think a lot of people felt that was necessary there at Defense, State, other places too. But now the real challenge over his next 3 years is going to be what he does to kind of put it all together and also build an organization and a path that doesn't get flipped quickly with executive orders and that sort of thing. So what does he need to do to solidify the changes that he's made, but also take that and fundamentally improve the competitiveness of our Department of Defense, which needs to look at a world that's very different. You look at South China Sea, et cetera.
You could argue that Pete has the toughest job of any of the disruptors inside the Trump administration. I might be naive when I say he might also have the job that has the ability to have the longest lasting impact to survive a change in administrations. So he's already made one cultural impact to the Pentagon, and that is to significantly change the way we view the Army, Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the men and the women that serve, and the men and women that go into it, to get rid of the DEI, to get rid of the identity politics, to put lethality back to the front. And here's the thing about lethality. It's not only good for America, but it attracts warriors to go into.
Right.
And we've seen that happen with recruiting.
Well, it's also the core mission. I don't think the Department of Defense, anybody steps back and says, that needs to be a social experiment.
Tom.
Oh,
But
no,
it wasn't.
I think it's very fair. It clearly moved to be a social experiment.
Correct.
As opposed to when we send our people out there, we want them to be the best trained
At killing.
at killing. Absolutely. That's it.
Bar none.
Now, hopefully they don't have to ever be in that position, but that's why you have a department
Destruction
like
and kill is the purpose of the military. It's not, by the way, society building. And so it wasn't just the left.
Right.
It was the right. The left did all the identity stuff, the insane stuff, the trans, the anti-merit stuff. All of that is the left. But, even before the left, the right got into the habit of using the military as a society builder. And that's not what it's designed to be. Right. You don't build a gun in order to build a well. You build a gun to kill the guy who destroys the well. And that's what the United States military is. And so he's repurposed or repositioned it back into its core mission. But the job that is the bear, the one that he has, and the one that could survive a change in administration is to change the way we approach the buying process, procurement, and technology
which has
of
been
war.
broken for decades.
And it is a bear, right? The military-industrial complex. And it is, what are we going to use to fight the future wars? Is it always going to be Boeing and Lockheed, who we appreciate their presence in places like Dallas, but is that really the best way to create the most lethal fighting force moving into the future? And he's begun to democratize that process, which it has to be. Lowest bidder, highest quality, and as warfare goes.
You see a lot more startups playing in the defense game now than you've ever had.
And you have to, because we know today that drones are the war of tomorrow, right? And not just drones dropping bombs, drones making their way around the corner of a building. Yeah. Not just drones taking out airplanes, but drones taking out soldiers. So we know that it's changing for warfare tomorrow. What does it look like in 5 years, in 10 years? And that can't be part of a procurement process that is at least that long in its bidding and build process, it's got to go to guys like Palmer Luckey and Andrew. It's got to go to guys. I don't want everything to go to Palantir, but it's got to go to some people that are ready to innovate warfare. That's it's kind of a weird thing to have come out of your mouth because you're like, what are we talking about? You're talking about like capitalism and warfare. Like that's Tony Stark. That's every bad guy in a Marvel movie. That's all of, I know Tony Stark wasn't a bad guy, but I'm saying, but this is the future. Bad guys want to kill us. We better be able to kill them first. And we better be the most efficient at doing so. And look, it is hard to look at, I don't know that it's the singular predictor of warfare success, because I'm not a military expert in history, but I do think it's one of the major contributors to success is who has the technological advantage.
Yeah. Walk through this, because I think this is a challenge for a lot of people. We have, since World War II, been at a position of being the leader of the world. Contested with the Soviet Union a period of time, more contested with China now.
Yeah.
But we've really been the leader. It would appear that we're trying to pull back from that from an administrative standpoint. Clearly, an indication of that may be in the Ukrainian situation, where we've shown less support than at least other countries and perhaps past administrations. Talk through that, Will, on where you see our position in dealing with the Ukrainian situation, dealing with the Russian situation, and trying to avoid a situation that would invoke an Article 5 when the next step becomes Poland.
So I'm not sure I agree with your description of the repositioning of American foreign policy.
Okay.
I wish you were right. I do wish we would withdraw more. I do wish we would focus more on America first. I don't think we need to be the world's policeman. I don't think you do either. I don't think we need to be involved in every foreign conflict. I don't think
anybody in America believes that.
And I don't want to be an empire. I'm not interested in the American empire beyond its transactional value to the American citizen. This idea of like America first, it's wrapped up in, historical connotations to Nazi sympathizers in America, the phrase, literally the phrase America first.
Right.
But it's the most fundamental and obvious purpose of the American government. Why do you elect American politicians but to serve the American people? You don't elect American politicians to serve the Ukrainian people. Right. You don't elect American politicians to serve the people of Nicaragua that want a better economic future. You elect the politicians and you give them, or your tax dollars are confiscated in order to serve the American people. Simple. Pretty simple premise and uncontroversial in my mind. The reason I push back on your diagnosis is that I don't think the Trump administration has been as certainly not isolationist. I think that they are probably doing things through the lens of America first, but my counterpoint to Ukraine for you is Venezuela. We're doing something in Venezuela.
No question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's been a sufficient explanation. I'm not saying I disagree or agree with Donald Trump, but explain to me why it serves America first.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what we're doing, even what Trinidad and Tobago just approved, which basically gave us access to their airports. This was in the last 24, 48 hours.
You got aircraft carriers sitting off the coast of Venezuela. That ain't for narco boats.
No, exactly. And so then it is the question of why? Like, if we're supposed to be the America first kind of runway for the next 4 years, why are we blowing up narco boats what seems like every 24 hours?
Well, I don't wholly reject their own rationale on the narco boats. Like, I do think you should, there's nothing wrong with that in my mind. I don't think it's a violation of war powers. I don't think it's a violation of Congress. By the way, Congress has long abrogated its ability, or wrong, to declare war. But it just doesn't stand to reason. If we're really going to go aggro on the cartels, do you start in Venezuela? You might start in Mexico. If just laying out your priorities. Maybe we're working our way up to Mexico. I don't know. But their rationale is not without truth, but I don't think it is ultimately the motivation in Venezuela. Educated guess? I think it's some type of rededication to the Monroe Doctrine. It's like the Western Hemisphere is ours. And China, you don't get to have Venezuelan oil. You don't get to have the ports. You don't get the influence.
The new strategic report coming out this last week was very explicit in that. It basically made a fundamental difference between how we treat the Western Hemisphere versus how we treat other parts of the globe.
That's right. And so it's not necessarily a rejection. It's not an embrace of isolationism, obviously. And it's not necessarily a rejection of, let's call it an activist foreign policy. It's a selectiveness as what I would hope through the prism of America First. Europe isn't, look, here's the thing about Europe. I do think, and Tom, I don't know how old you are. I think that for a long time in America.
I'm 42.
You look wonderful. The long time in America, the idea was that they are our cousins. And it's kind of like, it's an extension of what we did together in World War II, right? In large part. But Europe, look, if you don't, I don't want to do an inappropriate analogy, like, because it's the first one that popped into my head, the horrible story of Rob Reiner and his son, Nick Reiner. If you have a child that will not help themselves, what is your moral obligation after a while to help them? And the answer may be, I don't know, because I've been put in that position, never. You go and you go and you go because it's unconditional love. That may be the answer. But then you got to define unconditional love.
Sure.
Is it good to continue to enable, or do you have to stand up on your own? My point is, Europe is the child. In this case, it's actually your parent or your grandparent who won't do for themselves. They didn't fund NATO. All their defense military budgets are minuscule. We are their backing. And at the same time, they have sold out Western civilization in almost every conceivable way. I like to go to Italy and Spain and have nice long weekends, but they don't believe in free speech. They don't believe in fundamental values that we believe in here. And they are now importing massive populations of people who not only don't believe in it, but are openly antagonistic to it. Yeah. If you've not seen the stats on what's going to happen to Europe in our lifetime, it's freaking terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
With birth rates, I'm talking about, first of all, European native populations are in a birth rate death spiral.
Absolutely.
They are like at 1.3 in many of these countries. And you don't recover from
Actually, 1.2 in Italy.
You don't come back. You don't come back. Meanwhile, the Muslim populations they're bringing in from either Africa or the Middle East have a birth rate of something like 6 or 8. You're done.
Yeah.
40 years. And
actually, the numbers in the metropolitan areas are closer to
maybe
20.
higher.
Yeah.
They're closer to 20
like Paris.
Years. Yeah. And that's where it flips 50-50.
That's right. And you say, well, what point are you making, Will? I saw, are you making a nativist argument? Are you making a xenophobic argument? Are you making a culturalist argument? I'm making the argument that Western civilization is dying because the populations that are taking over do not believe in the same values. That is a factual diagnosis of every culture and country that they come from and the way they behave inside of Europe do not believe in the values we believe in. We here, this is why I fight so hard on this, are the Alamo. I think we're sitting actually in the inner sanctum of the Alamo because we're in Texas.
So this is it. Is Minneapolis the verse fight?
Yeah, Minneapolis is a great illustrative story, but it deserves attention and more attention, but don't let it stop there because it's symbolic of something much, much larger.
Yeah. Difficult to argue with any of your numbers. So what does that mean then? Because clearly we've got two autocrats in Putin and Xi that have aspirations that go far beyond their borders. They've made that clear. How do we as a country deal with that then?
Well, first, and I look, it's like there's two slurs in American politics. Are you Neville Chamberlain or are you Dick Cheney? I mean, which one are you here? But like, I guess I'm risking Neville Chamberlain here when I say I'm not as afraid of Putin as everybody else seems to be. I mean, he's bogged down in Ukraine. The idea that, now I know how Russians fight wars, through history. Throw bodies at it, attrition, long game, win, it's ugly. But I mean, there's no evidence out of Ukraine, and granted, they're getting a lot of stuff from us, money and weapons, but he's ready to set aside his desire. I'm not having a debate about what his desires may be. I can't get inside the man's soul. I have no idea. But his ability to march into Poland, his ability to march into the Baltics, his ability to reestablish the Soviet Union, it does. I for one, don't look at it and think, wow, he's really strong.
Yeah.
He's really strong. I don't see that. China's a different animal, entirely different animal. Because talk about long game. I mean, you're talking about a cultural war over long. You want to know a fascinating story?
Maybe. I mean, if you think about Xi, he clearly has made it known that his personal agenda is Taiwan. Personal agenda. It's a smart guy. He's 70 years old. He knows he's not going to be around 10 years. So although the Chinese view could be 100 years, his may be much shorter that necessitates an action that's out of the context of that 100-year reign.
Yeah, and remember what my prism is, America first. So the argument for Taiwan defense, set aside treaties and our word and the way it, the stature it places us on the world stage, which some of that is real. I'm not dismissing all of it. I think it's often overstated. But it's been the chips,
Absolutely.
And I'd like to think we're onshoring a lot of that. That's supposed to be what happened under Biden.
Can we do it faster?
And by the way, it's happening in Sherman, where I'm from.
It is.
Yeah.
And certainly the tariffs are an attempt to bring back a lot of that stuff.
Absolutely.
And, I've seen the evidence that some of it is working. Some of your previous guests here have laid it out to me in the way that manufacturing is returning. At what rate, we'll see. But I would like to think that we are not transactionally obligated to defend Taiwan from China, meaning we have to for our own sake. And then we can have an American debate about whether or not that treaty is something that serves America first.
So then why do we reverse policy on the chips?
Why did we reverse policy on the chips?
Reverse policy and now allow the second generation or the next generation down from the most advanced to be sold in China when 2 months ago we said we weren't going to do that?
Well, I can't answer that, but I'm talking about forget selling, manufacturing. So reduce our own dependence, chips, pharmaceuticals, everything, so that we don't have to go to war in order to stay in business in America. And then we can make our own choices and debate about who we want to sell to. Yeah, I know we're selling stuff to China.
Yeah.
Are they our enemy or are they our frenemy? Are they our economic partner? Are they a threat to the future of American dominance? I don't know. Not smart enough to know. But I am concerned, more concerned than Russia.
So I want to look further ahead. 2028 rolls around. The end of the Trump era will have lasted, call it 14 years since he came down the escalator. Who's next? And what's next? Because I think there's a great question around, does the Trump kind of Trumpyism, does it survive him? Was it a 14-year situation that was only him? What's next? Why? How? And where do we go as America, knowing that the left is running as hard as they can towards a socialistic agenda? What's next?
Well, first, I think the world of J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance is smart. I think smart is always an overvalued characteristic. I think he has wisdom. That's the biggest compliment that I can give someone. Do you have wisdom? That's very different than being smart. And I think he has wisdom. And I think that he is philosophically true. There's an article out today as we speak about Susie Wiles, talking to Vanity Fair inexplicably. And she described him as, I think, basically politically expedient in his move for Trumpism. I don't think so. I think we have to recognize that everyone has changed in this rapidly changing environment, and I don't begrudge JD of that very same shift. I went through that shift. I mean, if you'd asked me, I said it on air in 2015 or 16 about Donald Trump. I wrote a column in 2012 that was anti-Donald Trump. And I think, as I said now, he's the most consequential president of the last century. Right. So why would I begrudge JD of that same analysis or same evolution? So I think the world of JD Vance. I will tell you that Donald Trump is Michael Jordan. We're living in the age of Michael Jordan. You don't often get LeBron James just on the heels of Michael Jordan. So it's not my personal analysis of JD. I just don't know. I don't know yet how just electoral politics, just populist politics. How does he play? We'll have to see. How does he play with those people in the Rust Belt, where he's from? It has an incredible story.
An Appalachia story.
I don't know. I have some humility about projecting where the public is, but I think he would be great. And by the way, with the left, just always be on the lookout for somebody that you don't see coming. I don't see it out there. I don't see anybody. But Donald Trump kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, from one of the most famous men in America, he came out of nowhere on the political stage.
On the political stage, absolutely. Let's bring it a little bit closer, though. You talk to a lot of people. Clearly, you've got to be looking at these things from a political standpoint. What do you think 26 looks like in those midterms?
I don't think it looks good for Republicans. We'll see what the economy does through the first half of 2026. But I don't know. There's two main drivers. Well, yeah, there's two main serious drivers, and there's the underlying current. So the two main drivers are affordability politics. So that's real. What influenced Mamdani, and I think it's a very, very powerful message. I think it played a role in Nashville, where we saw a crazy radical candidate get within 3 points of Republican in a plus 20 district.
Yeah.
So those are real messages that Donald Trump has to take seriously. I think he does. He's scheduled to give a national address that I think is probably going to be centered around affordability. I think he cares about it. I think it's hard. And we'll see how much of it comes into play by 2026.
Is healthcare the other one?
No, it's not. It's going to be immigration. But to address healthcare quickly, healthcare is part of affordability politics. Like, how do you make, if you really think about what's unaffordable, the hard thing about this is, inflation is down. Yeah. Inflation is down. What's unaffordable? All the things the government gets involved in: healthcare, education, and housing. Those are the unaffordable things in America. And, education is subsidized by the federal government, and it's hyperinflation. It's absolute hyperinflation, out of control, and its ROI is absurd, yet we're all going to do it. I have a senior in high school playing for college right now. And healthcare is the most subsidized industry in America. And this is such common sense stuff.
And less transparent.
Yeah. If I'm buying something from Kyle and Tom says he'll pay for it, I all of a sudden don't care about the price. Right. And you don't care about the price. And it's going to get expensive. So that's what happens in healthcare really quickly. And then housing with interest rates, it's hard. So,
well, it's not only the interest rates, it's the governmental policies that have reduced the supply, especially in metropolitan areas where people have moved. Those policies of limiting the building of them in so many different ways.
I know.
It's a simple supply-demand game.
In some ways, that's a tough one for me, Tom. So I see my hometown of Sherman is about to explode. Projections are it's going to go from what I grew up in, about a 35,000 person town, to about 80 because of Texas Instruments, Globotech, chip manufacturing, and all the offshoot economy around that. And I see some of the build out, and I think, oh, you need the housing supply, to your point, and the only way to get this is by reducing regulations. And I see some of what they're building, and I think, what does that look like in 5 years? Yeah. So it's
absolutely.
And you know better than me. You know better than most of us that yin and that yang, that line you have to walk on that. The second peg is immigration.
But it does, from an economic standpoint, influence the price. That was my only point. Not saying right and wrong.
No, you're right.
But just as you said, it's a governmental policy that's leading to the affordability.
Okay, and that leads me to my second point, which is and this is what Stephen Miller argues often, is this is what causes housing to be in short supply is illegal immigration. And I think, you asked me about the midterms. So there's what I think is right and what you should do and the way it plays in politics. Sure. And I think that illegal immigration at large, like I'm ready for a real conversation about legal immigration, is something that is necessary for the future of America, like a real approach to it. But I'm afraid it's going to be unpopular. Look, we mentioned Nashville, but now let's go to Miami. Yeah. A Democrat just won mayor in Miami. And I don't know, is that why? I saw a stat the other day that Trump's favorability is way down with Latinos. And he hit record highs for Republicans, right? 46. And now I saw something that's down to 32. I don't know if that's right. You never know with polls. But if that's true, I have to guess that a lot of that has to do, at least in part, with immigration.
Yeah. So
I'm worried about the midterms.
Well, again, you've kind of been both sides of the media side, CNN and Fox. Do you see it changing? And I guess I kind of come at it from the standpoint of looking at Paramount and CBS and seeing a change of leadership there. Do you see the media moving? We talked a lot about far left on education, far left on the media. Do you see that changing in the next several years?
The CBS thing is just very, very interesting. You always have to. That is driven by the singular vision of the Ellisons. It takes a powerful figure who believes that, because the institutional. A friend of mine is a guy named Chris Licht. Chris Licht was president of CNN for about a hot minute. I don't even remember how long Chris had. And Chris tried to do the same thing with CNN. Not make it conservative, just make it rational. Just make it not insane.
Right.
And he suffered a full-on mutiny, like a full-on mutiny inside of CNN. And it's unsurprising, really. It's unsurprising that.
You've seen the same thing in New York Times, too.
Yeah. Exactly.
Bingo.
And interestingly, you haven't seen it CBS, but CBS isn't as big as CNN. Like, you got the nightly news, you got 60 Minutes, and you got the morning show. That's about it. Yeah. And
we think of it in the Walter Cronkite.
I know you think that it's big, but it's really like 3 or 4 properties. And there is pushback. I don't know how much of it is internal. That's what got Chris, is a lot of the internal pushback at CNN. But like Bari Weiss did the interview with Erica Kirk, and basically, I feel like the rest of the media's attitude towards that was, how dare you?
Right. Can't believe it.
How dare you?
Yeah.
So but I also think that the Fox News is such an outlier in media. I do think media cumulatively has a lot of power, but none of them individually quite have the power that they did outside of Fox News. So 2 million people watch me every day. And, and by the way, everybody says old people. That's true, but hundreds of thousands of what they call in the demo. More people watch me in the demo than really watch MSNBC in total, often. So it's Fox is the outlier because this becomes so important. And you talk about authenticity and trust and the whole thing, the algorithm, the feed, the independent voices, which are so valuable and played an incredible role over the last 5 years.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think we also seeing there's a real risk in this as well on who and what to trust.
So, given your background, as I said at the outset, you've touched on about everything from a media standpoint. Print, radio, television. You've been in a variety of different institutions, from CNN to Fox, as we talked about. What's next for Will Cain?
I don't know. Well, I've only had this show, The Will Cain Show, which is wonderfully located in Dallas, Texas, which is an absolute, I can't overstate what a blessing it is, a blessing from God and from Fox News, that is what happened in my career. I lived in New York for way too long. And my wife's from Lubbock. I'm from Sherman. We wanted to come back so bad. It's like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And the only real answer for me for all this time was, well, I'll probably have to leave, corporate media. I'll probably have to just go out on my own. And then I got a call about a year ago today, roughly, last December, and it's like, we have an idea for you. We want you to do the 4 o'clock Eastern time hour, and we want you to do it from Dallas. And I did my best not to say, I'll do it for free. I was already commuting to New York. I was living here for 5 years and commuting to New York weekly. And so Tom and Lois, I'm living my dream right now. Like, this job, it's incredible. And I'm going to do this. And I'm not thinking about what's next. We had the highest rated 4 p.m. in the history of Fox News over the last year, which is really saying something. And I've learned, by the way, to brag about yourself. It's against it might not seem it because I'm the one doing it now, but it's against my nature. But I've learned that everybody else does it and it works.
No. except in the White House. I don't think he's...
No, he never brags. He never brags. Never toots his own horn. But I mean, that's saying something because this thing, what is Fox News? It's 27, 28 years old.
When you took the spot of Cavuto, who was beloved, he was a long-time person.
And I'm comparing myself against a bygone era where, wasn't as many choices. Yeah. There's so many choices now for a consumer of not just news, but entertainment, of anything. So to have the highest rated 4 o'clock in the history of the network, and I'm incredibly proud, and yet I'm not even close to the show that I want it to be. I have a vision for this show. I'm going to work my ass off.
So what does the Will Cain Show look like in 5 years then?
Some elements of what the three of us are doing right now. Long form, more long form, more debate, more fun, more laughing at myself, more raw authenticity, fewer scripts, which I'm already pushing hard on that. I said I never want to read a script, but I do read scripts from time to time. You have to, because you got to get the nuts and bolts of the facts right. And there's a thing that happens when I do this, and it's why I do it. When I'm thinking, when I'm laughing, when I'm debating, my endorphins fire. I go. It's fun. It's great. I've never been mad at Stephen A. Smith for telling me I'm wrong. Really only ever got mad. I'm rarely mad during it. I got mad at this Senate candidate in Texas, James Tallarico, because he lied about me after the fact and misedited it and misrepresented what we did. And we had a great conversation. 10 minutes. The end of the conversation was like, where's your favorite barbecue in Dallas? And then he acted like I cut him off and ran away from his questions. And so he's a fraud. I'd rather Jasmine Crockett be the Democrat nominee for Senate than
I think you're going to get your wish.
James Tallarico. You think?
Yeah, I think you're going to get your wish.
That says something about you guys, Texas Democrats. But
this could be a fascinating race coming up.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
I would like to extend an open invitation to Jasmine Crockett to spend an hour with me on the Will Cain Show. I'll give you 2 million viewers in the United States on Fox News, a huge percentage in Texas, and I'll give you the whole hour. You can sit and talk with me, Jasmine, and I won't be mean. Much. A little. Not as mean as I want to be. and I want to see what makes you tick, Congresswoman. But after that, Tom, I don't know. Life is full of fun turns and adventures. I made the joke about ego. Maybe there's a time for me to serve. Maybe there's something more in this chaotic world that there's something more I could do, but this is what I need to do, and I will be doing for a while.
Well, we wish you luck. Appreciate the conversation.
It's been fun.
You've been open, you've been sincere, you've done all the things that we hoped was to be the case. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you for watching today's episode. Again, today's episode is sponsored by Clay Cooley Automotive, a family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years.